Hi everyone, this is Don Farber speaking on behalf of BAASS Business Solutions and also Sage Software and Sage Alerts and Workflow. I'd like to welcome you to this webinar titled How to Gain Human Capital and Grow Your Business. So a few words of housekeeping just to start things off, and that is if you have any questions as we go along in today's presentation, feel free to type them into the chat window. We will be saving time at the end for any questions entered in that fashion, as well as we'll open up lines for any additional questions that might come in. To give you an idea of what we're going to be going through today, we're going to be talking about this concept of gaining human capital. We're going to do that via a PowerPoint presentation, go over some of the concepts underneath that heading. After which, we're going to talk about a technology that enables you to regain human capital. We'll talk about the top 10 ways that technology is being used by customers today. And that should all take us, about 20, 25 or so minutes. Then we'll jump into a supporting technology, that being Sage Alerts and Workflow. We'll show you how that solution works, its components. We'll show you a real-life scenario set up within it. We'll come back to our PowerPoint for just a slide or two at the end. That should take us to about 45 minutes or so past the hour, at which point we'll take any questions that occur. My name is Don Farber. I'm one of the co-founders of Sage Alerts and Workflow, and just to give you a little bit of background about this solution, it was launched way back when, in 1999. There are just over 12,000 organizations worldwide using this technology, which make it the most widely used business activity monitoring application on the market today. We are just releasing right now our version 10 product. That's a new technology, new UI, and that's the product that I'll be showing a little bit later on in today's session. So, without further ado, let's get to the topic of human capital. So in a way, it sounds like such an easy thing to accomplish, because what we're really trying to achieve here is enabling your ERP users, your Sage 300 and other similar users, to complete 8 hours worth of work in 7.5 hours. Now that might not seem like all that much, but if we take that half an hour a day per ERP user, multiply it out times all of your ERP users, and further multiply it out times weeks, months, up to a year, it turns out that that gives you a substantial amount of human capital that you've regained and can put to work growing your business. Now, what you can do to regain human capital is something called actionable insight. So I think the first thing that we should do here is to define what we mean by that. Now, actionable insight is the process of automating the detection and response to critical time-sensitive business conditions and activities within your organization. Now, when we drill down into this automation, what we determine is that actionable insight addresses the two different kinds of tasks that take up the majority of an ERP software user's time. Actionable insight first is used to automate the processing of expected data. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. But actionable insight is also used to automate the identification of and the response to unexpected data that occur within every company today. And that process is perhaps more commonly known as exception management. So let's start out with actionable insight for the processing of expected data. You and your colleagues do a lot of expected data processing every day, from processing sales orders and purchase orders and shipments to generating and delivering relevant forms, documents, and reports. In fact, when we take a closer look at the processing of expected data, what we find is that it tends to be centered around the generation and delivery of content, whether it's sales order acknowledgments, shipment notifications, placing purchase orders, and the like. Now, what I want to do is drill down into one very specific example of this, and that is the process of invoice collections. That would be considered an expected process because if you sell products or services to customers, well, then you typically have to invoice those customers. So what I'd like you to consider is this. Who within your organization is responsible to run and review the reports of invoices coming due? Whose job is it to generate those invoices as well as deliver those invoices to the corresponding clients via the appropriate methods? Whose job is it to check to see if clients are paying for their invoices on a timely fashion? And whose job is it to put clients on hold if invoices are not being paid on time? Now, for many organizations today, the answer to those questions is often one of my staff or perhaps even me. And if that's the case with your organization, I'd suggest that you consider a system that automates expected tasks like this one, because it is what will increase your staff's available time, now enable you to regain that human capital that can be better used to grow your business. So now let's move on to the flip side of this coin, actionable insight for the identification of and response to unexpected data. Now, without a doubt, you and your colleagues spend a lot of time analyzing data, looking for and responding to pain points, anomalies, and exceptions. Now, if you don't think or you're not sure whether you spend a lot of time doing this, it's actually a pretty easy thing to identify. If I were to sit at your desk and open up one of your top desk drawers, what are the chances that I would find at least one highlighter pen there? And if you're like a lot of folks, it's probably in yellow, or you might even have them in the myriad colors of the rainbow. There is a lot of unexpected data that we need to keep an eye out for on a daily basis, whether it's stock shortages, lot coming up for expirations, shipping delays, customers who have stopped buying or are changing their buying habits, budgets about to be exceeded. Again, this is all the sort of stuff that you hope doesn't happen, but you know does happen, and therefore you need to keep on the lookout for it. Unexpected data. You'll pardon me as I go through today's presentation, as I tend to go through a lot of water as I speak. So if you have a few seconds of silence coming from my side of the phone, just me grabbing a quick bit of hydration. So once again, I'd like to drill down into a specific scenario, because if as an organization you keep stock, then it's pretty much a sure thing that on occasion you run out of stock despite your best intentions. So again, consider these questions. Whose job is it within your organization to review stock status, to see about those items that are nearing or have dropped below their reorder level? And how often does that person or do those people need to do those checks? Who is the person or people within your organization who decide whether a purchase order should be raised for an item that needs to be reordered? Who reviews and approves pending purchase orders? It's often one person, it's sometimes multiple people, and it's just all too common for purchase orders to sit on someone's desk awaiting their review and approval. Who submits those approved purchase orders to the appropriate suppliers, and then whose job is it within your organization to keep track of those items that you have ordered to make sure that they arrive on time and with a minimum of damage? If the question is who's doing all of these tasks, my recommendation is to let the answer be Sage Alerts and Workflow, because it really is your invisible assistant. And it really addresses this issue of actionable insight and regaining human capital, because Alerts and Workflow has insight into both your expected and your unexpected business activities, of course, including exceptions and anomalies, such as the ones we were just talking about. And when Alerts and Workflow detects that those conditions, those business activities have occurred, Alerts and Workflow automatically responds to them by notifying the appropriate people, generating and delivering the appropriate paperwork, whether it's documents, forms, or reports. Alerts and Workflow triggers additional analytics into those business conditions. And finally, Alerts and Workflow finishes up by automatically updating your Sage ERP and related applications with the details of what has happened and what has to happen in response to these business conditions. If we consider the components of Sage Alerts and Workflow, it looks like this. It begins by monitoring your Sage 300 and related applications for any business conditions that are important to you. Now, a couple notes I need to make about that statement. Number one, I said that Alerts and Workflow monitors Sage 300 and your related applications, because this is not an application that was built just for use with Sage 300. It works with all of your applications, those that are from Sage software, those are from other vendors, and those that perhaps have been custom designed for your own organization. The second item I need to mention here is that since we are focusing a bit on Sage 300 for our conversation today, it's important for me to note that out of the box, Alerts and Workflow ships with over 55 pre-configured business conditions, both expected and unexpected, that it can detect and respond to. You can use those 55, you can customize them, copy them, and create an unlimited number of additional events, as we call them, yourself. Now, if and when Alerts and Workflow detects that these expected or unexpected conditions have occurred, what does it do? Well, it starts out by notifying the appropriate people, whether it's your staff, your clients, your vendors. And we'll talk about those notification methods in just a few minutes. Alerts and Workflow automatically generates relevant forms and documents, such as generating an invoice and delivering it to a customer, creating a purchase order and sending it to the corresponding vendor. Alerts and Workflow can also generate additional analytics, whether you're using Crystal reports, Microsoft SQL Server reporting services, also known as SSRS, or even other third-party reporting tools, such as Sage Intelligence and Sage Enterprise Intelligence. Alerts and Workflow also provides the ability to provide analysis via graphical representation, because it's true. Sometimes a picture really is worth 1,000 words. And then finally, Alerts and Workflow completes the circle, closes the loop by updating your Sage 300 and other business applications with the details of what has occurred. Okay, so hopefully you've got an idea now for what Sage Alerts and Workflow can do. I want to share with you now the top 10 uses of it based upon our over 12,000 customers today. Some of these will seem pretty obvious to you. Number one, monitoring stock for shortages. Pardon me. Alerts and Workflow can monitor situations like stock nearing their reorder level, whether it's monitoring hourly, every half an hour, 5 minutes, or even continuously. And the information that Alerts and Workflow delivers and communicates can take a number of different forms, including email. Here we've got an HTML email alert message, but also text messaging to a cell phone or creating dynamic web-based dashboards. Identifying shipping delays. I was speaking with a customer last week, and I absolutely love what he said to me. He said, Don, my customers are really understanding. They understand that shipping delays happen. What they're not so forgiving about is when we don't tell them that a shipment has been delayed, or even for that matter, when a shipment is coming early. And I think that's key to the concept of Alerts and Workflow. It's communicating the appropriate information to the right people. And you'll notice here that this is, in fact, information that's being displayed on a web page or HTML page through a web browser. Automating the sales follow-up process. This is interesting. This actually turns out to be statistically the number one use of Alerts and Workflow. Because if you think about the sales process, there's so much information that needs to be communicated and delivered, whether it's initial quotes, sales order confirmations, shipment notices after the order has been delivered, following up with invoices and statements, and Alerts and Workflow can take part in all of those stages. And here we've got an example of Alerts and Workflow automatically generating a sales order confirmation being sent via email to the customer, Ronald Black, all done automatically. I mentioned earlier using Alerts and Workflow to keep an eye on outstanding invoices that are becoming past due perhaps. And here we've got two alerts. One is a listing of invoices that are overdue for payment, perhaps to be sent to a salesperson, while at the same time, Alerts and Workflow is regenerating an invoice for an invoice that's past due and automatically delivering that to the corresponding client. I mentioned that with Alerts and Workflow, it can generate its alerts in a number of different formats. Here, a simple alert, but also having a couple of attachments, including a rather simple bar chart, just 2 bars in that chart. Looks a little bit sad, but nevertheless. And also To me, one of the key uses of alerts in workflow is looking at time-sensitive information. Whenever I look at a customer's environment, I look at all of those date and time fields: invoice date, due date, delivery date, shipment date, discount expiration date, and lot expiration date certainly are key uses for alerts in workflow. And now I'm taking you from the actual alerts themselves that are delivered to the actual design of the alerts, because I wanted to show you that aspect of the application as well. Now, this is an alert that was designed within alerts and workflow, and we'll take a closer look at that design process in just a few minutes. But I also want to share with you the use here, the business case. Because when people tend to think about sending alerts, they tend to think of, well, their alarm clock on their bedside table. But here, this alert is doing something very different. This alert is actually being sent on the first day of every month, because what alerts and workflow is doing is the following. It's looking to see what each customer purchased for the month just ended. Then alerts is going 6 months back for each customer. Why? To figure out what each customer's average monthly sales amount is based upon that preceding 6 months of history. And finally, what this event is doing is it's comparing each customer what they purchased last month versus what the customer's average monthly purchase amount is. And in this case, if a customer's sales have dropped by at least 30% versus their average monthly sales, alerts and workflow is sending an alert message and email to the corresponding salesperson to let them know that they've got a customer who has significantly changed their buying habits. Automated trend analysis. You know, every organization wants to do trend analysis, but few of us actually have the time to do so. So why not automate it? If you're in an environment where you have a shop floor where you're dealing with jobs, alerts and workflow is a great addition to that environment. Looking at jobs and their completion date, and then available, budgeted, and actual materials, labor, costs. In this case, we can see that we're showing a list of job operations that are behind schedule. I always say that the time that you want to know when a job is running late or is going over budget is as it begins to run late or as it begins to go over budget, because by the time it's too late, by the time you've run out of money, well, it really is too late to do anything about that situation except put out the fire. Expediting purchase order processing. I mentioned earlier about the use of alerts and workflow to automatically deliver purchase orders to the appropriate people to remind them that POs require their approval. And that can all be done through alerts and workflow. In fact, alerts and workflow can send an email to a person requesting their review and approval of a purchase order. That recipient can simply reply to that email and say, yes, it's been approved, or no, it hasn't been approved. And alerts and workflow can pick up the workflow process from there, update the corresponding PO in the ERP database, and if appropriate, automatically then deliver that purchase order to the appropriate supplier. In all of the interesting uses of alerts and workflow, one area that people often overlook is the ability for alerts and workflow to spot and reduce missing or bad data, an order that's missing certain components, a contact with a phone number with an invalid number of digits, or contacts missing an email address. In this particular case, we actually have alerts and workflow identifying potential duplicate items in inventory. So if you've ever been vexed by bad data, missing data, the old phrase is garbage in, garbage out. Use alerts and workflow to identify and prevent that missing or bad data from becoming a problem. And then finally, it's absolutely worth mentioning that alerts and workflow has the ability to tell you whenever someone has changed any field anywhere in Sage 300, or for that matter, in any other business applications that you're using. You might want to know when an item's cost is changed or when the lead time is altered. You might want to know when a customer's credit limit or credit status has been changed. Alerts and workflow can do that automated auditing for you, and it will automatically capture both the old and new value of any field or fields that were changed. Okay. So now you've got both an idea of what alerts and workflow does, how people are using it. So let me take this opportunity to show you the alerts and workflow technology. Let me refresh my window and re-log into alerts and workflow. There we have our log on screen. And we'll put in our user credentials, grab myself a quick sip of water, and start talking about alerts and workflow. Now, a couple of words in general about this technology. It's a server-based application. That means it's typically installed on just one system within your IT environment. Alerts and workflow does not need a dedicated server. You could put it on your Sage 300 server, on your SQL server, your Exchange server, or even for that matter, run it on a laptop, which is what I'm demoing it to you from today. Now, alerts and workflow runs as a Windows service. And I like to use the analogy of a smoke detector for your business data. Because what you're really doing with alerts and workflow is you're telling it about the various business conditions, both expected and unexpected, that you want it to monitor for and respond to in an automated format. So once you install alerts and workflow, once you identify what business conditions you want it to look for and respond to, you quite literally turn it on and walk away from it. It runs in a wholly automated, lights-out environment. In fact, the most important statistic that I can give you about alerts and workflow is the following. I mentioned that there are just over 12,000 clients worldwide using this technology. Our support staff, and we take all first-level support calls on alerts and workflow, we get an average of 5.8 incoming support requests a day, fewer than 6 incoming requests for support from over 12,000 installations around the world. And what that really speaks to is the fact that it is a set it and forget it technology. Because whenever you're considering implementing a new solution, your first thought has to be, how much work is this going to take to set up? How many person hours is this going to take to maintain? And is this going to impact all of the other work that my staff has to do? The answer with alerts and workflow is that it has minimal impact because of the design. Okay. The user interface for alerts and workflow is all through a web browser. So everything that you need to set up and manage within alerts and workflow is done from this one browser window. Alerts and workflow stores its data in a Microsoft SQL Server environment, very much like Sage 300, and so it is scalable, robust, and reliable. In fact, I like to bring up one of my favorite quotes from an alerts and workflow customer when interviewed about the technology by an industry analyst. His response was quite simple: it just does what you ask it to. And to me, that really sums up alerts and workflow. You tell it what to do, you turn it on, and you let it do its work. Now, if we take a look at what we've got set up in our alerts and workflow system here, we've got it monitoring Sage 300. We can see a number of different modules here, including AR, AP, inventory, etc. But again, alerts and workflow is not limited to monitoring and responding to conditions just in Sage 300. If you're using a CRM app, human resource app, if you have add-on solutions to Sage 300, such as a sales tax solution, document management solution, barcoding solution, or even an inventory management solution, alerts and workflow works with all of those add-on technologies as well. So let's drill down into one of these branches. Since we've got accounts receivable highlighted, let's stay there. And as you can see, in the AR branch alone, we've got a number of pre-configured business conditions that alerts and workflow can monitor for and respond to, such as customers with an abnormally high balance or those customers who have had their credit limit changed. We'll just scroll through a couple of pages of these. Let's get down to our invoice-related events, because I certainly want to know if any of my customers have invoices that are more than 90 days past due. So we're going to drill down into that particular event. Now, everything in alerts and workflow is based upon authorizations and permissions. You get to control exactly who has access to the app and what functions, what features, what sets of data they have access. You might want to have some folks who simply have the ability to keep an eye on alerts and workflow to see what events have been triggered. You might want to give other folks the ability to create new events, or perhaps only customize existing events, or even customize specific components of those events. All of the components of a given event are provided to you from this one window. Every event has 5 key components, and those components are listed in the highlighted sections on the left-hand side of the current browser window, starting with a description of the current event, whether that event is active, and very importantly, whether this event is what we call repeat enabled. What we mean by that is that if we're running this event looking for overdue invoices every Monday at 9 a.m., and it ran yesterday at 9 a.m., next Monday at 9 a.m., when the event is scheduled to run again, if some of those same invoices are still more than 90 days past due, do we want to send out another or repeat round of notifications? Well, that option is up to you. In my opinion, if an invoice is still overdue, you're darn right I want to send out another alert. I want to keep on notifying someone until they pay off that delinquent invoice. The second component of an event is its schedule. How often are we running it? Now, this event, as we mentioned, is running once a week, every Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning. But you might be having issues with staying on top of your inventory levels. And monitoring stock status once a week is certainly not enough, perhaps not even once a day. So you might need to monitor stock levels every hour, every half an hour, or even more frequently than that. Every event has its own schedule, which is definable by you. Beyond that, when you define a schedule, you're able to specify such things as, well, if I'm monitoring my stock status every hour, is that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or is it only from maybe 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.? Because if no one's going to be in the office, if we're not transacting any business before 9 a.m. or after 5 p.m., probably no reason to run the event at those hours. And the same is true for the days of the week. You have control over that. And you can even create a corporate holiday calendar. Once again, if no one's going to be in the office on a date indicated as a holiday, then we can probably skip running the event on that day. All this is configurable on an event-by-event basis. Now let's go over to the triggering condition for an event. And Alerts and Workflow supports a number of different triggers. Now, the most common way that Alerts and Workflow identifies business conditions is by using what we call a query. A query goes into the underlying application's database, in this case Sage 300, to identify whether certain business conditions exist. And we support a number of different styles of database query, including .NET Provider, ODBC, and OLADB. A lot of abbreviations and acronyms in that group. So let me take you into the Query Designer to actually put a picture in front of you. People often ask me whether they need to be a programmer in order to configure or modify triggers in Alerts and Workflow. And the answer to that question is no. You don't need to be a programmer of any kind, but you do need to be familiar with an application's database schema. In plain English, you need to know what data sits where in an application. Alerts and Workflow automatically presents you with a list of all of the tables or files, as well as all of the fields within the Sage 300 database, as well as within any other database that you're integrating Alerts and Workflow with. If I want to see all of the fields that are available to me, I can simply expand the contents of a given table, and I can even search for specific fields based upon their name. So if I want to see just those fields in my open invoice table that has to do with tax, I can simply jump to those particular fields. I'm going to jump ahead a couple of tabs to show you how you can specify the triggering conditions. Here you'll notice this query has 2 filters. The first is looking at the amount that is due, and we're telling Alerts and Workflow to retrieve only those invoices that have a balance of greater than $0. Everything here is available to you in a plain English format. Your conditions, your operators, etc. You can do Boolean logic, linking multiple conditions together with ands and ors, and you can even access our calculation wizard for doing such things as calculating the number of days until an invoice is due, or in this particular case, calculating the number of days overdue that an invoice is. Again, this is done through a wizard, so no programming knowledge required. Let's preview the results of this query, see if we in fact do have any invoices that are more than 90 days past due. So we'll specify our threshold, 90 days, and look to see if we have any matching records. And in fact, we do. And you can, of course, scroll through these to confirm that they contain the appropriate matching records and the data that you require. Let's cancel out of this query, out of this trigger, to return to our main event window. Before I leave from triggers, I do want to mention one additional important aspect of alerts and workflow. And that is that these days, more and more organizations are working with hosted applications or cloud-based apps. For that matter, more and more organizations need to be monitoring the content of websites. How does alerts and workflow do this? It does so by embedding a web service API. Referred to as a REST web API, this enables alerts and workflow to monitor data that's not only stored in on-prem applications within your organization, but it allows alerts and workflow to go up to the internet, to the cloud, to connect to, monitor conditions within hosted applications, as well as data within one or more websites. Okay. So let's move on to an event's deliverables. We've identified that this event runs every Monday at 9 a.m. It's going to look for invoices that are more than 90 days past due. So our next step is to specify what we want the event to do if and when those conditions are met. Now, the most typical response is to have alerts and workflow generate an email alert message. But as you can see, that's far from the only response action or deliverable that alerts and workflow can execute. Maybe you want to generate a chart showing all overdue invoices by customer or by salesperson. Perhaps you want to generate an analytical report, such as a Crystal report, an SSRS report, Sage Intelligence report. You can do all of that under alert content. Maybe for that matter, you're working with a collections agency, and at the end of every week, or perhaps once a month even, they want you to send to them a comma-separated file of all invoices that they need to institute collections for. Let's talk about the methods by which alerts and workflow can deliver alerts. Email is the most common, but a very close second is in sending text messages to cell phones. What I often see is that text messaging is used as a quick heads up to alert people to something that requires their attention. And then more details can often be found either in the form of an email and or in the form of a dynamic web dashboard. An alert delivery method we refer to as webcasting. It publishes and dynamically updates web pages with alert details. So someone up in finance could have a web page up that says, here's a list of all invoices that are currently more than 90 days past due. And someone down in shipping, for example, could have a web page up that says, here's a list of all of the orders that need to be fulfilled today. Let's take a quick look at the email alert that has been configured for this particular event. Now, you can manually design email alerts in plain text, HTML, but very importantly, we don't require you to know HTML syntax. You can simply click on the button called Show HTML Editor, and you can create really nice looking email and web-based alerts without having to know, once again, any programming language, not even HTML syntax. You can easily drop in tables with certain numbers of columns, fill in the column headers, as well as the corresponding field names that will be filled in beneath them. You'll notice in this particular alert the presence of commands called begin repeat and end repeat. If I'm sending an alert message to one of my sales reps to say, here's a list of all of your customers' invoices that are more than 90 days past due, I doubt that sales rep wants to get a separate email for each invoice. Although that is an option, my preference is to configure the alert to look like this one. To have each sales rep get a single email, or perhaps even to have each customer get a single email showing just those invoices that are related to them, whether it's customer specific or salesperson specific, easily defined exactly as you want them to appear. Now, before we leave the deliverables branch, I do want to point out that this event is also generating a report, although in this case, it's not truly a report. It's our standard invoice form. After all, if a customer is more than X days, in this case, 90 days past due, probably the smartest thing that I can do is to regenerate the past due invoice, which is what I'm doing here, outputting it in a desirable format like PDF and automatically delivering it to the corresponding client. Before we leave the deliverables branch, I do want to mention that alerts and workflow can go back into Sage 300 and put a delinquent customer on credit hold or create a purchase order for an item that has reached its reorder level. So there are a number of APIs for doing these database updates, whether it's in Sage 300 or elsewhere. A number of different tools and APIs are available for taking those kinds of actions. And then we come to the last component of an event, the event's subscribers. Whom are we going to notify about this particular event? In alerts and workflow, we divide those people into two groups, standard and advanced. A standard subscriber is when you know the names of the people or the names of the groups whom you wish to notify. In this case, I'm sending an alert message to myself, and I'm also sending alerts to my finance team. And in fact, I'm sending multiple alerts to both. In my case, I'm receiving alerts via email, web dashboard, and text message. My finance team is being notified via just email and web dashboard. But again, think about this particular event, invoices that are overdue by more than 90 days. The best people for me to notify are the customer themselves and also the salesperson who's responsible for the customer. We refer to these as advanced subscribers because we're notifying people who are related to or associated with the condition that is occurring. In this case, we've got one or more overdue invoices. We need to take a look at each of those invoices and make sure we deliver them to the corresponding customer and salespeople. Okay. So you've got here a good idea for how alerts and workflow operates. Once you've got an event configured such as this one, you simply update it or save it as is. We'll save our changes that we've made. And at this point, this event will automatically start running every Monday, starting next Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning. Within alerts and workflow is, of course, the ability for you to monitor the status of those events that have been run. So let's take a quick look at our monitor. We'll look under application events. We don't have any that are waiting to run. Let's see if we have any that have been checked. And we'll look at activity for this month. And so here we can see we've got, in fact, an overdue invoices event that was run. We can see that it was run back on March 2nd. But was it met by any matching criteria? For that, we need to click over on Triggered. Triggered tells us that not only was this event run, but it was in fact met by one or more matching invoices. So let's drill down into the details of this event. We can see what this event did was to send alerts to a few different addresses. In this case, it was sending alerts to me. In alerts and workflow, I'm set up with both a primary and secondary email address, since I wanted to make sure this alert reached me regardless of where I was, the day of the week or the time of the day. Sage Alerts and Workflow notified me at both of my email addresses. But what were the invoices that met that event's criteria? Well, we can simply take a look at the outgoing email message that was generated by Sage Alerts and Workflow, and I can see here my list of invoices that are overdue and can scroll through them to see their full details. Of course, if I wanted to see the actual alert message itself, it's simply a matter of jumping into one of my email clients. I'll open up Gmail here, And we can see not that exact event, but a pretty darn similar one. This is an email alert sent to me by Sage Alerts and Workflow letting me know about invoices that are coming due within the next 30 days. Once again, a nice crisp looking email alert message showing me exactly what I need to know with an attached chart. So let's just bring up that chart to have ourselves a bit of a closer look at it. This is showing my open invoice total, and it looks like it's totaling by salesperson. And just based upon these numbers, I'm going to guess I have a couple of sales reps who are sharing duties. Jonathan Miller and Shelley Westland having the same open invoice total. I'm guessing that they're working as a team with the same clients. Okay. So again, hopefully that now gives you an idea for exactly how Sage Alerts and Workflow works, how you can go into the application to configure your own events. And as I said, all of these events, you can use them, you can copy them, you can customize them, all according to your requirements. So we'll just come back here and take a final look at let's take a look at a slightly different branch. Let's look at some of our inventory-related conditions that Alerts and Workflow checks for. You'll notice also out of the box, Alerts and Workflow ships with a number of pre-configured graphic alerts, generating charts about corresponding business conditions. But let me be cognizant of the amount of time that we have. I'll jump back into our PowerPoint for a couple last comments, and then we'll leave time for Q&A. So I want to leave you with this thought, and that is, if you were to take just 6 members of your staff who are involved in your ERP processing, folks up in finance, folks in shipping, etc., and if you were to use Sage Alerts and Workflow to automate just 20 minutes of what they're currently doing manually today, again, generating and delivering invoices, statements, purchase orders. How about just the running of analytical reports, whether it's Crystal reports or SSRS reports, making sure those reports reach the appropriate people? It doesn't take very long before you start to look at some of those tasks that your staff are doing manually. Think about automating those tasks with Sage Alerts and Workflow. The savings becomes quite substantial and very quickly. Again, using this example, automating just 20 minutes worth of tasks in a worker's average day, at the end of a year, you're looking at 66 days of regained employee time every year. And that's time that you can use to improve customer satisfaction, to grow your business. It's basically an invisible assistant that'll help you and your colleagues succeed in your organization's business venture. So something to consider. It doesn't take a whole lot of usage of this technology around actionable insight to really pay benefits in terms of staff time regained. Okay. I promised that this presentation would take about 40 to 45 minutes. I'm sitting right about in the middle of that targeted time range. So let me stop talking for a bit and see if anyone has any questions. As I mentioned, you can use the chat box on the GoToWebinar session. Also, my colleague Remington will be here to play the role of MC in terms of letting us know if we received any questions. Remington?
Thanks, Don. So I do have a couple questions here, and if any questions come through, I'll read those out as well. So just enter them on the chat box. So the first question I have is, what happens if an alert fails to reach its recipient?
Right. So a good question there. And I think that's a question that is probably based upon experience of trying to send someone an email only to have that person never get back to you, or perhaps even try to send someone a text message and only to find out, oh my gosh, that person has changed cell phones. They have a new cell phone number. And so what's kind of cool about Alerts and Workflow is that it can actually determine whether or not an alert has been successfully delivered. And so if it does encounter an invalid email address, or perhaps or perhaps an email server that's gone down, it can detect that a text message has failed to reach its intended recipient. And then it's up to you regarding what you want Alerts and Workflow to do. Typically, what we see organizations do is to set up what we call alert failover. So you can have alerts and workflow try to deliver an alert for up to X minutes, maybe up to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But if that alert fails to be delivered within that expected time frame, you can have alerts and workflow fail over that alert to an alternate recipient. And probably my absolute favorite example of this is a hospital network in the southeastern part of the United States. They actually use alerts and workflow to text message to notify doctors based upon the symptoms of patients that are picked up by an ambulance corps. Very cool use of alerts and workflow. But they ran into the same issue I mentioned earlier. Sometimes a doctor gets a new phone, a new number, and they fail to notify the hospital administration about that. So in this particular case, what they did with alerts and workflow is when a patient was picked up, alerts and workflow would notify the appropriate doctor. If that notification failed to be successfully delivered within 5 minutes, because this was in some cases a life or death matter, alerts and workflow failed over that alert to the nurse's station so that the nurse could either track down the appropriate doctor or they could find an alternate doctor to attend to that patient. So it was a rather long way of answering that question, but alerts and workflow can detect if an alert fails to reach its intended recipient and can fail over that alert to a secondary or even tertiary recipient.
So the other question that I have here is, what other applications does Sage Alerts and Workflow work with?
Wow, well, that's quite a question. So let's start off perhaps just in the Sage world. So it's pretty much a safe assumption to say all Sage applications, but just to rattle off a few, on the ERP side of Sage, Sage 100, 300, 500, and X3. And I'm going to focus just on North America for right now. There were lots and still are lots of other ERP solutions of Sage that are still being used by clients, whether it's Sage Business Vision, BusinessWorks, or products like that. They all work with Sage Alerts and Workflow. But then we go on to the CRM side for a product like Sage CRM, Sage HRMS, Sage Fixed Assets. So pretty much any application that has the word Sage starting off. Not only does Alerts and Workflow work with them, but we already have collections of pre-configured events to work with those applications. And earlier on, I mentioned some add-on solutions to Sage Alerts and, to Sage 300. So products like Sage Document Management, also known as Alltech, Sage Inventory Advisor, also known as NetStock, barcode scanning solutions. Not only does Sage Alerts and Workflow integrate with those solutions, but for most of them, there's already a collection of pre-configured events built for those applications. And we refer to those collections as event packs, and we make them all available to you for free. And I haven't even started to touch upon those applications that sit outside of the Sage world. Applications from such vendors as Exact Software or Microsoft Software. Pardon me, starting to lose my voice there, so I better wrap up this answer. So right now we offer event packs for about 100 different front office and back office solutions. And you can see what those are by going to the website alertsandworkflow.com, and you can see the pre-configured events for the Sage apps, as well as look at some of the other applications that Sage Alerts and Workflow has been used with. Remington, I better stop there because it looks like my voice is going out on me.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions coming in either. So at this time, I'd just like to thank you, Don, for presenting today, as well as all of our attendees for taking the time out of their busy days to attend as well. And I hope that everyone found it beneficial to attend. There will also be a recording of this webinar being sent out later this week.
Thanks, Remington. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate your time and wish you a very good afternoon. Bye-bye.